Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Valentina Stramiello. I'm the head of programs at the European Patients Forum, and I'm hosting this PEOF session together with Anne-Charlotte Fauvel from EATRIS. Today, we are going to have a session on making meaningful patient engagement in translational research the new normal. I'd like to share with you a few housekeeping rules before we kick off the session. Next slide, please. So all questions will be shown with the name of the person who asked, just as you could comment in a live meeting. Please be respectful to others as you would be in a live meeting. If you want to ask a question to the panelists, please use the Q&A function. Avoid to use the chat function for specific questions that are content related. We would prefer to keep the chat function just for exchanges of comments or any technical aspects. Not all questions will be answered live, so bear with us. We'll try to respond to some of them in written, or we will try to take them and respond afterwards by email if it is possible. Next one, please. So this is the agenda for today. We are kicking off. Soon after the introduction, we will start with a presentation on accelerating patient engagement in translational academic research. And this will be delivered by Anne-Charlotte Fauvel. This will be followed by a panel discussion, and Slido questions, and also a Q&A with the audience. We will then wrap up and share next steps. And we will have and we will end at 4 p.m. CET, hopefully sharp, because of course we need to be mindful that there will be another PEOF session starting at 4:30. And with this, I'd like to give the floor to Anne-Charlotte for her presentation.
Thank you very much, Valentina, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on patient engagement in translational research. So I'm Anne-Charlotte Fauvel. I'm EATRIS Head of European Affairs. I'm also a board member of EUPATI. And I would like to kick off our session and set the stage for the future discussion we'll have with our panelists, and then report on what EATRIS has been doing to accelerate patient engagement, of course, in close collaboration with EPF in the context of EATRIS Plus, which is an Horizon 2020 funded project coordinated by EATRIS. First, I wanted to start explaining a little bit what EATRIS is, because maybe presume some of you may have not heard of us yet. So the mission of EATRIS is to accelerate the translation of scientific discoveries into patient benefit. I think we all know people who are with us today, all very much aware that medicine development still takes too long, it's very costly, and also has a high risk of failure, especially in the preclinical and early clinical phase. So translational research is actually very wide in scope. We usually refer it as the process from bench to bedside, but EATRIS' focus is also very much on early clinical and preclinical research. So with the support of our countries, so member and observer countries, we have currently 14 countries supporting EATRIS. We provide access to the resources, facilities, and services of 127 research institutes located in those countries. So our role is really to provide the resources to address the barriers that can curb the translation of research and therefore advances for patients. I won't go into details about scientific platforms, but you could see our scope is pretty broad. And we're also a non-for-profit organization. And in the bottom of the slide, you can see a few examples of some of our key initiatives. We're involved in many Horizon 2020, IMI, and now Horizon Europe projects. EU Pearl is one of our IMI projects where patient engagement is a very strong feature of this initiative focusing on platform trials. We also have an important role in the EJPRD. Some of you may have heard of it before, where of course the rare disease focused patient organization have also a strong role. And then EATRIS Plus, which I will give more details on now. I wanted to also look back a little bit on our journey with patient engagement. We're actually quite a young organization because we've been in operations only since 2014. And from the start, we really wanted to address actually patients and patient benefit, because that was the entire reason why we've been created. So already in 2015, we set up our first advisory committee, which regrouped several representatives of patient organizations. Unfortunately, that committee was not embedded sufficiently in our operations and strategy, so was not utilized as much as we had hoped for. But in 2018, patient engagement really became a top priority and made much more visible through our strategic plan, which is still ongoing this year. And in our journey, it would have not been possible to be that active without EPF, with whom we signed a collaboration agreement in 2019, as well as UPATI in 2020, and AHUS is a sustaining partner of UPATI. And then in January 2020, we had our AHUS Plus project funded, and then that really gave us this additional resources that we needed, and to see what AHUS could do as an academic research infrastructure to accelerate patient engagement in research. And we're focusing on three pillars. I think the first one is supporting patient education. So this part is very much done in collaboration with UPATI. We make sure that patients who are attending our training courses, and we also co-develop training materials on multiple aspects of translational research with UPATI as well. And the second pillar is the one that we'll mostly focus on today, is training researchers on meaningful patient engagement, because we see that even though there might be good intentions, there's definitely a gap there in terms of the guidance that researchers need to actually not only seeing patient engagement as one criteria from the research funder, but meaningfully engage with patients. And then the last one, co-create with patients, actually refer to the work we've been doing in multiple European-wide initiatives to onboard patients and patient organizations directly in research projects with meaningful roles. So I mentioned EU Pearl earlier, but for example, we have a 25 million project starting in September on repurposing, where we'll develop an innovation platform for repurposing, and there are patient organizations such as UORDIS, FamiCure, FundoCure, and patients in general will be actively involved in selecting the repurposing projects that will be prioritized by the platform. So every time we are involved in large-scale initiatives, we make sure that this is an important feature of those projects. So within AHUS Plus, what we started to do, especially in 21 and 2020, is try to understand better what were the opportunities in academic research to accelerate patient engagement. And more importantly, what were the roadblocks? We felt like there was a lot of roadblocks that we had to identify and understand better. So we carried out a range of workshops and webinars to just get more insights directly from researchers and the research community. And this webinar was just an example of the type of events we were organized, once again, in collaboration with EPF and UPATI. And we actually also undertook a consultation targeting academic researchers exactly to do this, so to really understand if you're engaging with patients, what's challenging, what's successful. If you're not at all engaging with patients, we also want to hear from you and understand why you're not involved with patients at all in your research, and what could actually help you in the future to change your research practices. So actually that survey, that consultation, we decided to keep it open. So my colleague will put the link in the chat. So if there are among you today who are academic researchers, we would be very grateful if you could take a few minutes to answer our survey, because that would continuously feed into our work. And I wanted to also spend some time highlighting some of the results and takeaways from the feedback we received on that survey. So we asked researchers who were already engaging with patients what they found was the most challenging in patient engagement. And the top three responses were time and human resources, building that long-term collaboration, but also educating other researchers on the added value and process of patient engagement. And then we also asked the ones who were not engaging with patients in their research to tell us why. And we had the top three responses were, well, I'm involved in discovery research, so I may not see what's the added value engaging with patients that early in medicine development process. Second one was, I would like to engage with patients, but I don't know how to start. This has come back a lot in the workshops that we organize. And then the third one is, I think, an important point about academic research culture. I don't engage with patients because patient engagement is not required by my supervisor, my research institution, or the research funder. And I think we need to also bear in mind when we discuss this today about the importance of other stakeholders, not only the individual researchers taking initiative or not to meaningfully engage with patients, but also all these authorities and hierarchies and relationships that exist for any life of an academic researcher that also have a role to play in changing those research practices. And then we asked them, if you were to engage with patients, what do you think would be the most challenging? And the top 3 responses were identifying the right patients, dedicating the time and human resources to make the engagement meaningful. I think that came back a lot. Then the third one, building trust. I think communication and trust also were quite important responses that we received. And then we also wanted to leverage that consultation to see which resources actually they thought would be useful, and also see the level of awareness in terms of what's already existing. And I think 90% of the respondents ticked all the resources that we had in mind that could be useful. So they will be welcoming additional guidance. There will be a matchmaking platform, a patient engagement plan template, a how-to guide, etc. But what was interesting is I didn't put them on the slides, but we asked them the level of awareness. If I recall, the level of awareness was quite low of existing resources. I mean, we know Patty has been doing trainings. We know that PFMD has done a lot of work around those I2 guides. There's of course a paradigm toolbox, which is amazing and very comprehensive. But we saw also through the consultation that there was a lack of awareness, which I think is also an important point to discuss today. And here I think those 6 blocks on these slides kind of summarizes for us at this point of our journey and our analysis, the roadblocks, those barriers that really prevent researchers from meaningfully engaging with patients in their research. So I think the research culture that I mentioned, which is very specific, which plays an important role in the decision-making of researchers. Also the added value of patient engagement. We realized that in discussion with researchers, we would go straight to the how. How can we make patient engagement meaningful? But we were even skipping the why. So the starting with the why in a discussion, because it's not that obvious. Maybe obvious to us, but not necessarily obvious to the research community. So added value also was an important point. Communication and trust, of course, finding the right language and establishing a fruitful collaboration, a win-win collaboration. Time and human resources, the diversity of patient engagement, because we know patient engagement can have a lot of different phases, also depending if we're talking about discovery, early clinical research or clinical research. So I think it can also be overwhelming for researchers. And then connecting resources. So like I mentioned earlier, there are resources existing, but it seems that a very large part of the research community in Europe and probably beyond is not aware of those and not utilizing those, unfortunately, although they would find them useful. So why we're here together today, and we wanted to put that on the agenda of the event. I think what we see and is there's been definitely a top-down push for more responsible research and innovation. We've seen it in Horizon 2020, in Horizon Europe. It's an important policy at the European Commission and also for national funders. And public engagement and patient engagement is a key pillar of this type of research practices. So there's been a slow shift happening in research practices towards more responsible research. However, looking at the ground, looking at what's happening in AHUS has 125 research institutes. We're in touch with researchers every day. And the why they should even consider patient engagement in their research is actually not that obvious. So we need to be able to connect the dots here a little bit better and make sure that we develop the right guidance, the resources, also maybe the right dissemination strategies to reach to all those researchers that are not the believers, I want to call them, of the added value of patient engagement. So in this context, and as part of AHS Plus project, we assembled in February a task force, which is really diverse, composed of patients, and some of them are in the panel today, and patient organization representatives. And we also brought academic research representatives. So we have researchers from the lab, from the hospitals, and also patient engagement managers, so more on the research management side, who accepted to be part of that task force, reflecting with us on how we could accelerate meaningful patient engagement translational research, how can we improve practices and convince more researchers to take action. And the main output from that task force will be developing a toolkit. And before I get into the timelines of the toolkit, I also wanted to reflect shortly on the outcome of the first discussion we have with the task force members. And as I said earlier, I think starting with the why, I think we realized that we should not presume that it's obvious for all researchers to meaningfully engage with patients also before clinical research. What we also realize is that it's not only individual researchers we need to target, but it's also the institutions, the one responsible for spreading research practices within their research institutions. And lastly, we also should not underestimate the role of research funders. I like to think a few years back on how we started to move towards more open science with open data and open access to publication. And that was a major shift, and it's still ongoing in the research culture, and how long it took and how important it was for funders to get involved in that shift and to support that shift in the research culture. And I think for responsible research, more specifically for patient engagement, I think we should not underestimate as well the potential role that funders can play to accompany that shift from the top down. And I think one of the key takeaways also from my early discussion is that we don't want to redo what's out there. And there's of course a Paradigm Toolbox and so many amazing tools already existing. So maybe finding the gap on what may not be existing yet. And also not underestimating the importance of dissemination, trying to find and reach those researchers who are the skeptics, or those researchers who may not be active yet, and try to deliver to them a toolkit that would be useful. So for the timelines, we started recently our work, as I mentioned, today and in April, we'll do a lot more consultations to get more feedback, to help us understand the full picture and make sure that we have all the understanding before diving more into developing that toolkit, which we plan to develop over the summer. And then the idea would be that in December, after another round of feedback with focus group and stakeholders, so really having regular points of consultation, we would hopefully be ready to publish the toolkit. And before closing, I also wanted to quickly mention the next step, because we want this process to be inclusive. Obviously, we need as much knowledge as possible from everyone. So today's session is very important to us to hear from everyone from different perspectives. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What we can do concretely together to accelerate that change in research practices. And we also started planning for May focus group discussions around stakeholder groups that we think are important to speak to. So I mentioned research funders, also researchers and research managers, and of course patients. So those dates are already fixed. If you'd like to get involved, we'll provide our email addresses at the end of the meeting. So feel free to get in touch, and we can see if you can participate, and very much appreciate your contributions. And there will be more consultation rounds later in the year. So also if you're interested in that, let us know. And as I mentioned, the survey for academic researchers is still open. It will remain open. So if you're a researcher yourself, please take some time to answer the questions, or otherwise, we'll be very grateful if you could spread the word and encourage researchers to do the same. I will close here, and thank you very much for your attention. I will give the floor back to Valentina.
Thank you, Anne-Charlotte. So actually the survey, I noticed, gathered a lot of interest already, and a lot of the participants would like to stay connected with us. So we are saving all your email accounts to be able to be in touch with all of you. And as Anne-Charlotte said, if you are a researcher yourself or you know any researcher in translational research, please share the survey so that we can gather as many responses as possible, also to have more robust results that we can build on. So I would now start with our panel discussion, and I will introduce our panelists. And so we will have a very first question for all of them, and then we will kick off the real panel discussion, including the audience as well. So just to start with, I'd like to introduce you to Bojana Mirosalevic. Sorry, Bojana, if my pronunciation is not perfect.
You're great,
Bojana,
don't worry.
Bojana is a chemist and embryologist by education, but she's also a patient advocate. She's the founder and president of the Patient Association for Rare Diseases in Serbia that is called Život, which means life. Bojana is a UPATI patient expert. She's a member of the Patient Advisory Committee of Beatrice Plus, and she's also the initiator for the new legislation, which is called Zoya's Law, concerning the prevention and diagnosis of genetic and rare diseases in Serbia. We have on board also Maria Jose Ruiz Alvarez, who's a scientific officer at the Directorate General for Research and Innovation in Healthcare in the Italian Ministry of Health. She's the representative of the Ministry of Health within the ERANET on personalized medicine, and she's leading on the work on patient engagement on personalized medicine. We have also on board Marco Inzitari, who's a specialist in geriatric medicine and master in healthcare leadership and management. He's the principal investigator of the research on aging, frailty, and care transition of the Barcelona group at the Vall d'Hebron Institute of Research. And he's also the current president of the Catalan Society of Geriatrics and Gerontology. And last but not least, we have on board Professor Thilo Kroll, who's a full professor of health systems management at the University College Dublin. Over the past 30 years, Professor Kroll has conducted interdisciplinary research with a focus on disability, rehabilitation, and health-related topics. Before embarking on his academic career, he also worked as a patient advocate to promote the voice of young people with arthritis and disabilities. So thank you all for joining us today. And I will ask all of you a very first question. Which are your first thoughts about the survey results that Anne-Charlotte told about? And I mean, who wants to start? Feel free to kick off.
Okay, I can start. It's Bojana.
Please.
So good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for having me and to inviting me. For me, these results are not surprising results. I see that every day. What is for sure is that we need to work on raising awareness among researchers about what is actually patient engagement, why it is so important. And I think the very important is to explain them with concrete examples how patient engagement can contribute to the whole process. And I think it will be very useful to have everything on one place, on one platform, along with the matchmaking platform guidelines, etc.
Thank you, Bojana. And any other very first comment, Marco?
I can comment. In the same line, actually, my first thought I had written down, it's not surprising. So it's exactly the same as Bojana is saying. I think besides what she already said, that I can subscribe completely, I would say that something that I had not considered, but is really true, that there are heterogeneous rules. It seems that there are heterogeneous rules between institutes, research institutes, and so on. I mean, I'm not really sure that many research institutes, even very, very prominent, they have policies, specific policies about them, about patients' engagement. I think it's very important that we don't only act on the researchers, but also we act on the institutions to adopt policies specifically directed to foster patient engagement. I think also that the one problem that emerged from the survey is that the methods are heterogeneous. And another thing, which is not surprising at all, because I come from the healthcare sector, which is usually where people are usually very busy in both clinical and also combining research, is the fact that it's time and resource consuming. So we have to conciliate the many needs and tasks with, let's say, many people can see it as another task instead of as an added value. And I think we have to turn it down and make them see that it can be better for their research. Even it can become more efficient if they really engage people.
Thank you, Marco. I don't know if we have any other first comments, Maria or Tilo. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, Maria, do you want to go first?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you in this discussion. Yes, I agree with both speakers before me. It's clear that it is a broader contribution, bringing many benefits. But really, I am happy to see that their survey reveals an improvement in the patient knowledge, engagement knowledge in the different researchers, because it's something that is increasing. And then I am happy to see that they are know that they have to include patients in their research. Of course, there are many practical issues, as Marco has said. It's difficult to enroll other scientific partners in the project, and I think this is the same for the patient. We need to have a knowledge of the people that you want to include, and there is something that we can see in the reply. We need to the collaboration, the bidirectional learning for both parts. But there is something that we like also to highlight, that as you know, the research is in continual evolution. I think also the patient engagement have to follow this evolution. Then it's important also to take these continuous new technologies that are being included in the research, also for the part of the patient, and just also to highlight that maybe here we need also to include specific country perspectives, because we have different levels of knowledge in different regions, different countries, and this is something that you can include also in this survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Tilo?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that was said before. I think you highlighted a few elements there, and culture is, I think, slowly but definitely it's changing, in terms of towards engagement. And I think I'll see that probably in various settings, that the culture and the willingness to engage is there, but that's taken a long time. I think I sometimes give presentations where I say, well, it's not rocket science, it's not a really it's not very difficult, to talk about patient engagement, because it's fundamentally connecting with other human beings and having informed conversations. It's taken a little bit of this complex and anxiety, I think, out of the discussion. I also would say the type of research that was highlighted there in one of the comments, I don't think that's necessarily an excuse for not engaging, especially around discovery research. I think there's a lot to be said about hearing the public, in terms of what views and ideas they have about the research that's going to be undertaken. The building trust will take time, and especially the issue around identifying mutual benefits, in the process of research are critical, because benefits are relative to where you're coming from in terms of expectations, your life circumstances, and so on. So the benefits might not be the same or identical for all the patient partners. So that again requires a process of engagement, negotiation, the pre-commencement stage of research before you actually started, to clarify some of these values, the roles and responsibilities and expectations ahead of time. And I think there's a call for probably funding agencies also to recognize that to a greater extent, that more funding probably needs to be going towards building these relationships and having these pre-commencement conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tilo. This is a very nice icebreaker, actually. We have just one comment from Merete, who's also a patient advocate and member of the Patient Advisory Committee. If you can be quick, Merete, so we can then kick off.
I will do my best to be quick. I think first of all, I agree with the other panelists, what they have said, but I have 2 points I would like to also to be taken into account in the future. And being a member of 2 HTA bodies, I know at least in Denmark how important it is to be neutral. That means not to have any conflict of interest. And therefore the methods the patients are included. I know it can be done, but it has to be taken into account not to raise conflict of interest so patient not later can be a member of a HTA body. That's one thing. And the second thing is what is also important to consider, that is what type of patient is it you need. And I think the way you, Patty, have defined various types is excellent, but I think it has to, if there's going to be made a guide for researchers, I think it is important that this is also mentioned. So those things are considered in advance.
Yeah, this is a bit the purpose of our toolkit, actually. So thank you for highlighting it. And just wanted to flag one question that came from the audience, which says, if we think that awareness can be more successful on site, so going to the research institutions and present there, indeed, we are starting to build those connections. Of course, during the pandemic, we could only hold all the virtual meetings, but through the EATRIS network, we have started to touch base directly with national nodes, research institutes working at national level. And the same through ERAPERMED. We know that ERAPERMED has set up a patient panel, and they are already discussing patient engagement really thoroughly. And so they are going to share all this knowledge with other European countries. So with this, I'd like to kick off with the first question that will be shared also with our audience. And the question is asked to the panelists, but of course the audience through Slido will be able to respond as well. And the question is, what do you think are the most challenging in patient engagement for academic researchers? So please, those responding through Slido, use a few words so that we can easily read through and gather your input. And so again, I would start maybe with Maria, because you have been working on this from a founder perspective. If you want to share what you think are the most challenging aspects.
Yes, thank you. Well, I am sure that nowadays academic research understands the importance of patient perspective, but taking into account the complexity of the process of preparing a research project, I think the first challenge can be to avoid the fact of engaging later the patient in planning research activities in a tokenistic manner. The second is the difficulty to identify the representative and appropriate patient following the different aims of the study, preventive, diagnostic, treatment, also the design, specific, observational, interventional, and of course the field of the disease, because every disease has their own characteristics of the patient. Then parallel to this, it's important to establish the patient role on the project that also is complex. It has to follow the objective of the project. And here they have to respect the diversity, ensuring the diverse patient perspective is clear. Is they enroll a patient with high scientific background. It can be a bias on the perspective of the patient, and this is something they have to take very careful. The other point, the more practical, is to find a common language. We have the difficulty of the English language. This is not the same for every patient, for every region, and we need also to to take in consideration the difficulty of the ethical committees and the evaluation of the project, because these committees need to homogenize, to standardize the methodology to evaluate this patient engagement in all the process of the project. And finally, well, this is something that all has already done, that this is essential research and funders, not only research, but also funders education on the meaning of the patient engagement. And
thank you, Maria.
I think all, thank you.
Any further comments on the challenges? Maybe Tilo or Marco, if you want to share your views.
Yeah, happy to jump in there. I think I would agree with everything that Marie has said. I think high on the list of things that come up in our discussions in Ireland, we have a public patient involvement national network now forming, which involves all major universities, the funders, and over 60 national organizations to address some of these administrative barriers, ethics, estates, finance, and so on. But one of the things that often comes up is also the diversity, of people who are involved in engaged research, and it's typical typical approaches that there are a pool of people that are constantly called upon, but they're not reflecting the equality, diversity, and inclusion profile of the population. So this requires a clear and tailored communication process and tools that need to be developed over time, so that we reach people with communication difficulties, with people whose first language might not be English or Irish, whose people who might not be as visible as others, and people might be homeless or in rural areas, who might not approach and be present on panels. But also people who have experienced systemic sort of exclusion from the public participation, through being marginalized, and so we need to think through these practical approaches, how we reach out to them to get their voices included as well. And then in terms of I guess the research application process, we're trying to discourage these things where it becomes a tick box exercise or last minute affair, that researchers approach the research office and saying, we need to fill the public patient involvement box here. What do we put in there? Because that's not reflecting a genuine ethos or commitment to mutual involvement for the benefits of better and more impactful research. So stop there probably.
Thank you, Tilo. Any other comments?
I can comment very, very, very briefly. I have, I think, three main points from my personal experience. The first one is to be constant and follow up the whole process. I would say we tend to do it sometimes in a specific parts of the process, and for little pieces. But I think we really need to be go towards a real systemic and integrated way of engaging patients, as Maria was saying, from the very beginning and not a later stage, and then to follow up and to do it at every stage and in all process and not forget it. The second one, I think it's also the structure. So, I mean, we don't have a specific guidance protocols, and also we don't have a structure which is ready, trained, and so on. So sometimes we happen to do different tasks, and even if we are not the more experts, sometimes we have to start doing that because we don't have this kind of support structure. And the third one, I think, within the process, probably the most challenging aspects are the guarantee of the safety and protection of the person. So I think we tend to be quite good in rewarding the patient, but not really to guarantee them to solve any doubt, any problems they can experience, and also in all the legal data protection and ethical aspects. I think we need to grow a lot, mainly when we go into these gray areas, For example, we happen to work a lot in research project with people with cognitive impairment and dementia who don't have a legal tutor. So they are not, they don't have a legal representative. So it's hard to really bring them in, and at which stage of the cognitive impairment. Of course, if they are very, very advanced, it's probably impossible or should be, but I think they can also participate in some aspect. But there is a gray zone that is very challenging for us. So this safety and protection is very important to work more on it.
Thank you, Marco. Bojana, from your patient perspective.
Yes, I think that simply researchers doesn't know enough about patient engagement. They don't recognize enough the importance of involving patient. And but just to be clear, I would not like to generalize, because I personally know researchers who are even very dedicated to involving patient in the research process. So, but every day, researchers ask me where to find more information, or on how to find the right person, for example, the right patient representative to contribute meaningfully to the whole process. And also, as already previously panelists mentioned, for some researchers, patient engagement is something they have to do to get some grant. So it's an item in application that they have to fill out, and they don't really know exactly what it means. They don't even know why it is so matter, nor where to find more information about it. So I think that these are the challenges also.
Thank you. So, and I see also in the responses we got from Slido, all the responses go somehow in the same direction. And of course, we will collect all of these responses, and they will also help us inform the work we are conducting on the toolkit, for sure. And with this, I would move on to the next question and hand over to Anne-Charlotte for the next question.
Yes. So what I quickly touched upon in my presentation is that we should not take the why for granted, right? So the added value of patient engagement may not be so obvious to the majority of academic researchers. So we would like to ask the panelists and also the audience why you think academic researchers should take action. Like, what is the added value of patient engagement in research? And while everyone brings in their responses, I would like to ask panelists to comment on this. And maybe Thilo has some thoughts on the topic.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think there are a number of areas where we could see the added value, and I think it depends on the perspective that we're taking for whom this value there is. I mean, there's for the researcher, obviously, but also for the public and the patient. So first of all, I think for the public, I think there's an issue around accountability, to whatever is being researched is paid for often not by taxpayers, and so to make research accountable to the public and allowing it to be scrutinized and to be as much tailored to the needs that are available in the public, is important. So the second thing is to make it inclusive, to look at the diversity of the public again, so that it's not just research that's being conducted to further a particular select group, but also that actually its impact reaches sort of a broad range of diverse members of the public. So that's one area. So the second one is, I think the benefit would be in terms of avoiding pitfalls in research, to use methods and instruments that are appropriate, that can be engaged with, that can be understood, and that don't exclude people, in the process. For example, it could be getting better ideas from members of the public, particular patients, how they can complete surveys, how they can engage with focus groups, how they can be included in trials, and and so on. So Then finally, I think sort of the third point I want to make is about facilitating implementation. So if there's a communication channel that's open, that's inclusive and engaged throughout the process of research, the road to impact, to making this research really matter and count and to make a difference is actually almost guaranteed, because people are being taken along on the journey. So it will facilitate sort of the implementation of any beneficial outcomes of research in the end, and also foster future communication around further use. So I'll stop there.
These are all very good points. Yeah, thank you, Thilo. Saskia, please, you want to comment on this question as well?
Yeah, thank you. Well, also you have to think about that the patient and the patient representative who are asked to be included in research are living the disease themselves. And if they will be involved in a study, it allows to offer unique and personal insights also in all the different stages of process. I mean, you can have patient perspective from planning and design in studies, but also communicating those results. So I think from a research point, you should think about where can I put patient engagement in, because you have different studies, you have different phases in a study that you can, especially patient engagement being very important. Mm-hmm. So you should, I mean, that's those priorities that I think that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I see some people also in the poll have made similar comments. Yeah, thank you, Saskia. I was also wondering, Maya, Jose, maybe from a research funder perspective, I know you were involved in the ERAP-PERMED, which is this transnational funding instruments for personalized medicine research. And you've started to include patient engagement in the conditions of the funding call. Like, what has prompted the ERAP-PERMED, or as you representing a funder, to take those decisions?
Yes, we have this initiative for funding research on personal medicine, and we have already 23, I think, countries involved and more than 30 funding agencies that are working. And I think that currently they are increasing the number of funding agencies that are trying to include the patient engagement in the process of the research. Of course, it is difficult, and we have a different structure that we have included in this. We have started with the advisory board for the selection of the calls. We have included the patient perspective in this board, and we try to identify the perspective of the patient for the topic that is already identified as priority in the different national countries to organize the call. Of course, you have to consider that the personal medicine is not a specific disease. That is a field that includes from the preclinical to clinical, include also new technologies, and include health technology assessment and ethical issues. Then it's very complex to include one specific patient perspective. And we have the second point that we are also including is the inclusion of the patient in the process of the research. For this reason, we have encouraged in our call test, in our criteria, the participation of the patient. We decide don't do this as a mandatory, only encourage, because we think that it's important that the patient, the researcher understand the values of this participation. Then we have included different criteria for the evaluation of the proposal, more dedicated to the impact and also to the complete structure of the project at the interaction of the different partners or participants on the research. And the last point that we are ongoing and we are trying to do is to include the patient perspective in the decision funder, in the decision of the project that had to be funded. This is also more difficult because that I had said before, we have a broad a landscape of the different disease, and to organize a panel of patients for this broad disease from the infection to oncology, from neurology is complex, also for the human and economic resources. But I think that our researchers understand the value of many ways. And one other thing that we would like also to encourage the researcher is to identify a kind of part of the research to include or to organize a best model of identification, analysis, and apply the patient experience, the needs, the priority, and to adapt this knowledge in their own research. I think it's the researchers that have to find this model, and after this, they can monitor the impact of the experience of the patient and the research with a kind of flexibility study. They monitor the impact and address the diversity and lead to develop the ongoing evaluation indicators to adapt in a future intervention. It's a kind of to create a model of interactive feedback during the project of the research projects.
Yeah, we actually had a question. Thank you, Maria Jose, for the explanation. And we have a question from a participant, because you did made a reference to personalized medicine. Of course, it's could be in different disease areas, not disease specific. So do you think that patient engagement in personalized medicine is less valuable or applicable?
No, of course, it's the contrary, because our main scope is to find the right therapeutic, the right diagnostic for the right patient. Then the experience of this patient is the center of the personal medicine, not only for the treatment, but also for the perspective of the prevention. The difficulty is to engage the patient in a research call with different fields of the research included.
Great, yeah, thank you very much for that. I think maybe we move on to the next question, Valentina. So I think moving towards more.
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
So actually, yes, the next question is about which toolkit resources do you think would be most useful? As you know, we are building this toolkit. Our intention is to build on existing material that has already been produced, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So, but we want to see also if there is anything that is not there yet and you think would be useful for researchers to allow patient engagement in their work. And so the question is addressed both to our audience and to our panelists. So maybe Bojana, you can start, because from your experience as a patient advocate, you can also see what can help.
Yes. So, well, the main goal is that the patient or patient representative meaningfully contributes and to improve the availability of medical information for patient and other stakeholders. So it needs to be something which can actually explain phase by phase, in which phase how patient engagement can contribute. So the role of a patient in research ranges from a passive one, where the patient is only data point, to an active one, where the patient can be even researcher. So the active patient engagement in research can potentially lead to improvement in the credibility of the results, higher rates of enrollment or retention, and in their direct applicability to patients by asking relevant questions about patient important outcomes, etc. So it is important to make some guidelines or some place where all that kind of information can be available to the research.
Thank you. Marco?
I think that the toolkit will be a great help for researchers. I think also probably that there has to be this clear direction in start from the scope and from the main question, so from the why, also apply to the specific case. So why and what do we want from the engagement, and mainly what do people, so what do patients that we want to engage want from that process. So I think that should result very clear to the researchers that they have to start from the beginning, and not only on the methods, which is probably the main part of the toolkit, but the scoping, I think, is key, as well as the planning. And then I think we need like guidance on how to work on safety, protection, rewarding, and all the steps, and also specific techniques that can be imported from existing resources. I think I saw that the idea of a template, for example, could be very useful. So something to feel and follow and so on as a short tool, which inside a bigger, let's say, toolkit. So I think we need all the guidance, but also specific tool that can be applied day by day.
Thank you, Marco. And Thilo?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the first thing obviously is not to necessarily duplicate, and that's sort of that you said that and stated that, that because there are already many resources and tools out there. The second point, I guess, is to look at the whole research cycle or different phases, of researchers of the research process, and seeing what is needed for which stakeholder group, at each of these phases. Then I would say what's particularly interesting for a transnational toolkit is to look at if you work across particular national areas, with patient groups. If you're bringing patient groups from across Europe together, are there particular guidelines needed in that space that haven't been examined or explored to the same extent? And then finally, I would say adapted formats for engagement. So not one size fits all, and there's not this, that the toolkit is not a cookbook, it's rather an evolving ecosystem of resources that brings in under some kind of framework, the best tools that people could use, both from the patient and the public side, as well as from the researcher and the professional side, to facilitate conversations about research and engagement throughout the process.
Thank you, Thilo. And Maria, and also Meret and Saskia, if you have any additional thoughts you want to add right now, feel free.
Yes, I was thinking, I don't know, it could be possible to include a kind of patient partner database as the partnering tool that we use on research projects. Something to put in contact the patient, the experience of that you can offer to enroll a scientific, to be enrolled by the scientific partners. It can offer the possibility to identify the expert with most suitable profile for a specific task or for the available resources. I know that it means a big effort because it has to be continuously updated, but for the research, for the funder part, I think we need some kind of partner tool with the patient to be more easy to contact them, to know who are, because otherwise we need also to go to the big funder organization, to big patient organization, and maybe we lost some of the diversity.
Thank you. And I'm seeing the responses from the audience, and they seem all pretty much aligned. And I see a lot of mentions to the need for guidance, mapping tools, templates, which is also somehow what we were, what was our preliminary thoughts, that we know that a lot of material is already available, but it's difficult for researchers to navigate the wealth of material that is out there and to understand how they can use this material. So having the material there is not enough or for them to be able to start working and using these tools. So for sure the toolkit will allow and provide some further guidance to let researchers get on board patients in their work. And then I think if I'll see, yes, please.
Ismerita, I have a comment. And that is, I think it is very important that we could really think from the start of including patient, what is it they're going to contribute with? They're specialists in their own diseases and what is needed, and also priority of what is needed. And they are not going to be experts in research. They're going to understand the basic things to contribute to support the researchers of the prioritization of their needs. And it's important to keep it as simple as possible, because otherwise I think many patients will get lost.
Thank you, Saskia.
But I have there some comment also. Many patient and patient experts, they're not patient experts without reason, you know. So many of us finished very, very strong, very hard courses like EUPATI on drug development process. In total, that course lasted 2 years. So if you're a patient expert, you're not scientist, of course, but you are pretty much understand more than simply stuff in research process. But it is very important that highlight that the patient involvement can help researchers approach their work from a totally new perspective. Because if they hearing directly from people living with specific disease can provide researchers with meaning and context. It can help them make sense of the long hours, days, nights spent in lab with zebrafish, for example, or looking down in a microscope in a dark room, make it the end goal real. So it is important, the knowing the difference research makes to the lives of patients will provide research with that extra level of the motivation. That is very, very important.
Thank you.
Just one thing, I think we also forget one step before that, because I saw in the survey that a lot of researchers or other stakeholders have problems finding those patient representatives who have that knowledge, what they do with EUPATI. And I think this is also something that should be added in the toolkit of where can we find those patient engagement and patient representatives. What is EUPATI doing for us? How can we find national a patient organization who can provide those patients to get in contact with researchers? I think this is a step that is crucial to mention in a toolkit, because if we are not doing that, they are not looking for them.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Saskia. And I see there is a lot of conversation going on in the chat about the status of being a patient expert and patient advisors and how they can contribute. Of course, when it comes to research, we need to offer all the wide spectrum of patient profile to be able to be involved. Earlier in the discussion, the issue was mentioned that we need that diversity and inclusion in place as well. Otherwise, we risk to have biased results at the very end. Not all patients can gain further knowledge, but they live with the experience of being with the disease for all their lives. And so maybe that's also something that should be taken into account from a researcher perspective. I see that Maria from Iupati has shared also the link to the matchmaking tool for collaboration between researchers and patient experts. And this is a fantastic tool because often the question we get is how we get these contacts. And with this matchmaking tool, actually it's possible to sort based on the expertise and the disease area. So I think it's for sure the way to go for the moment, and probably we'll see if any further tool will be needed to have more patients on board. If there are no additional comments on this specific question, I think this conversation was already useful because it will inform the development of the toolkit. We can move on to the next question.
Hi, Valentina, I just had a quick question to maybe potentially Marco and Thilo.
Yes.
We're talking about, I mean, there's a lot of resources that, we mentioned, the Iupati matchmaking tool, and also many others. And Thilo, you mentioned a few as well. I mean, what can we do once we get to the toolkit being finalized? How do we actually reach out effectively to the researchers who actually have no interest or no knowledge or lack of awareness at patient engagement? Is there recommendations you would have for us on, like, these actions or these places you definitely go to get to those people, and not maybe having the toolkit only available for the ones who are already convinced and already active?
I think if I can speak first, I think we need a multifactorial, multi-leverage strategy. I mean, we won't reach the target only doing one thing. I think we need a good dissemination strategy, which could really leverage on different aspects. I mean, first, media and social media dissemination, so that can get to the whole scientific community. And then also there are platforms, for example, EATRIS, as said before, there are a lot of scientific institutions that are members or founders of EATRIS. And I think it's a very good strategy to really work on their leaders to have the chance of presenting this toolkit in different ways. If this is combined with policy that require to add this, patient engagement strategy, like Maria Jose was pointing out, calls that really, let's say, force somehow to think about that and include a strategy, and people know that there are tools and toolkit over there, they would go and look for it if they heard about it. So I think it's very important to have a very good dissemination and knowledge translation strategy.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Marco. Thilo?
And
just briefly to add in, so I would agree. I think the one thing is to build it into probably locally and nationally into efforts that are underway, and to see okay, what's the added element that this particular toolkit will bring, and so internally, I think the way we're working at the moment is to get researchers while they're young, in quotation marks, sort of working with students, postdoctoral researchers, and doing a lot of training and awareness raising initiatives. And at the same time, we're working a lot with the funders as well. And funders increasingly require not only statements of patient engagement, but a clear plan. And so we're providing a lot of bespoke supports around that. So if the toolkit fits into some of these initiatives, and we could, for instance, point to the tool and saying, if you want additional information, especially around how you work with various patient groups in Europe, and on European grants and Horizon grants and so on, I think it would be very, very beneficial. So I think it's interfacing with the whatever is going on in different countries locally, and bringing it to the awareness of the champions, that could drive this forward.
Excellent suggestions. Thank you both. I also see some interesting points in the chat. Medical societies, yes, definitely. I think very important target group, and go to conferences, and also make sure that the toolkit gets featured in academic conferences where the researchers are, which totally makes sense. So I think it deserves a lot of attention if we want the toolkit get the attention it deserves further down the line. Okay, and I would just one more question following up on that for Maya Jose, because I was wondering, because you were encouraging, you said it was not mandatory, but encouraging researchers to include patient engagement activities in their research proposals. Did you make suggestions in the call text and the guidelines of tools to help the researchers, or you can let them find their own ways?
Yes, we are organizing a guideline to show how these researchers can involve to open a window on what is the landscape of the possibility to engage patients in the different steps. Not because you can start from the beginning, from the decision of how project we want to organize, to the end, how to disseminate this information. Then we are organizing this guideline, but of course, from the point of view of the public research funding, we need to also to involve the funder because we need to establish a clear policy or reimbursement support for this patient engagement. This is one of the most important or difficulty points because of the different national rules, economic restriction that we are in face.
Okay, that's great to know. So the guidelines, but also the remuneration, because it's good to encourage involvement, but then of course there needs to be a cost eligible in the research proposal. Okay, I think we can move on to maybe the final question of our.
Yeah, and before that, I'd like to comment on a point I've seen in the chat about the fact that actually researchers will look at the toolkit when they have already decided to undertake patient engagement. And this reminds me of the fact that within EATRIS Plus, we have realized there is this gap, in fact, and we are going to develop an awareness campaign on patient engagement addressing researchers, because that's the very first point. We realized that not necessarily researchers are aware of the why, as Anne-Charlotte also said during her presentation, and they don't necessarily see that their work has an impact on patients' lives. So this is going to be done in the near future. And with this, I will move to the last question for today. And I will ask our panelists really what you think you can do concretely from your specific perspective to increase patient engagement in research. And I would start with Thilo.
Okay, thank you. I think I keep it short. So I think one thing that we're currently working with, and I mentioned already the national network there. So we're working within universities with various entities to support patient engagement, and involvement in research. And that means working with the Human Resource Department on co-researcher contracts with finance, as well on reimbursement issues. It means working with the ethics committees, that they understand what patient involvement or engagement means, to have recognition within the career development structure of the university, and to recognize patient engagement as a relevant and important tool within the researcher development and education, and also working with places like the estates to work at accessible spaces for patients and members of the public to work with researchers, on research projects. Then I think the second thing is around innovation, around engagement methods through collaborative design, seeing what works for what patient groups to be involved. And then thirdly, maybe to look at what is coming out of this engagement innovation in terms of what works well, what doesn't work well, what can we learn from it, so that we can see it as a continuous evolving reflexive process, that allows us to improve over time and to learn from others. And we have several shared learning groups underway, and a learning forum that Dr. Emma Doris, who works with us, is facilitating. And then finally, I think it's the process that I mentioned a few times to look at what can we do to enhance diversity, and not just working with people who will never leave an advisory board, who have been trained as expert patients and inform project after project in the same uniform way, but we're not refreshing the pool of voices and experiences in the process, which we need to consider, I think, in terms of making the research more inclusive and more diverse over time.
Thank you, Thilo. I see Merete has something to share.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. First of all, the comments just made here around awareness and diversity, I completely agree. But I will also say one thing, and you also started by saying being involved at the university level. I am actually involved in the university level, and I just educated PhD students in why should they include patients and how can they do it and what is the added value of this. And I know in the beginning they were, a little, didn't say anything, but I know also afterwards they were so happy about it, but it was a new text they haven't considered. So I think this about having a toolbox to the awareness campaign is extremely important.
Thank you, Merete. And Marco, please.
Yes, it's a bit of a different strategy, but I think that Thilo pointed out about that. To that, we after let's say working on specific single projects in which we involved patients from the beginning in the advisory board, and then we followed up and we shared with them the results and so on. We are moving on, and we will launch before the summer a living lab focusing on aging. Which will be called the Barcelona Aginco laboratory. And for us, this is a major step to really consolidate a structure which is oriented towards like participatory research, but also innovation. And this will be a space, let's say a structure, which will have also a physical structure, but mainly a virtual structure, in which we will foster like the connection, the constant connection between patients or older people in our case, caregivers, researchers, but also companies and policymakers. So we really want to have this permanent structure to work on a specific project. And in this case, we have already in the funding institution, among the funding institutions, we have involved from the very beginning, from the very start of the first idea, an association of older people from the community, and we want to bring in more different patients association as partners. So this is our main strategy that we will make very visible that we are aiming at that, and we also seek collaboration and benchmarking at European level. If someone in the audience is interested in that, we can explore and we can share with them what we are doing.
Thank you, Marco. And Bojana.
Yes, well, from the one side, through my patient organization, very often we organize trainings and education for the patient themselves. We organize Academy for the patient every year, and we try to make them stronger and to give them knowledge and skills to be able to sit at the same table with other stakeholders in rare disease area, of course. And on the other hand, I'm also working as a patient engagement officer in Global CRO company, which is very patient focus oriented, and we also educate their sponsors, pharmaceutical companies, researchers, experts, how and why the patient engagement is so important. And I'm very glad because in every rare disease clinical trial in that company, the patient voice is very, very present. So that is my mission.
Thank you. And Maria, Jose? I mean, we are aware you're already doing a lot, but what's next in your effort?
Yes, I think that from the point of view of the public funding agency, we need we need that the researcher involve the patient with the human and economic resources, but also the funders need to destinate the research these resources. Then for this strategy, we need the evidence. Then I would like to invite the researchers to dedicate part of this job to offer evidence of effectiveness of this patient engagement, to offer evidence of this engagement, offer a benefit for the research, offer a benefit for the implementation of the research in the health system care. And this is one of the things that I think is more important for the funder.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have noticed a question from the audience, from Flo Clet, who makes a good point about approaching medical societies. We should also get in touch with them and make sure they also have guidelines on how to implement meaningful patient engagement and guidance protocols for researchers. Probably this might be very effective way to approach researchers, and we will take definitely into account this suggestion. Do we have any further comments from our panelists? Otherwise, we can move on to the next steps. Okay, so basically, this is just to share again that in the process of developing the toolkit, following this session today, which has already been very useful because we have gathered a lot of input from the audience, we will have focus group sessions, and they will be stakeholder specific. So the first one will be on the 2nd of May, and we will bring on board research funders. On the second one, on the 3rd of May, we'll bring on board researchers and research managers, because also we realize that we don't need to approach just researchers, but also their managers, so bring also the institutional level. Often researchers may be willing to involve patients, but maybe they miss the resources and the infrastructure to make it happen. So we are trying to target also this specific group. And last but not least, on the 5th of May, we are going to involve patients. And so if any of you in the audience is willing to join us, feel free to share your details in the chat. Of course, these focus groups have a limited capacity. We can bring on board small groups to have effective conversations. And if it is not in the context of these sessions, we will try to bring on board all your perspectives. As I said, in fact, we will have regular conversations rounds until we deliver the final version of this toolkit. There will be multiple opportunities to consult with all of you. We thank you, of course, thank all our panelists. We want to thank our audience. We are aware that today we are already in holiday season, so it's not self-evident to have so many people on board. If you wish to share any further views with us, please, you can contact Anne, Charlotte, or myself to the email accounts that are shared in the chat. And we wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.